Okay, I want to just review our 5 infectious agents. Make sure you know what each agent is. Make sure you know how they cause disease. Make sure you know the preventative and the treatment. Be careful not to mix those up. I noticed some of you did on the quiz. Preventative is just that. It prevents the spread of the disease or prevents the disease from taking hold. And then treatment is after you have the infection. What, in general, do they typically do? So with viruses, what are viruses? Subcellular parasites, meaning that they attack individual target cells, inject their DNA, and take over the cell. All right, so what would be the preventative? Vaccination, and of course hand washing. You're not going to get a viral infection typically from eating anything, so sanitation is not a good answer, but cleanliness could be. All right, what are bacteria? Small colonies of simple cells in 3 different shapes. Make sure you know your 3 shapes. Preventative for bacterial infection is sanitation and cleanliness. Typically, we don't give vaccinations for bacterial infections. The only vaccinations that actually target bacterial infections are actually targeting the toxin produced by the bacterium, not the bacterium itself. Okay, treatments are antibiotics. When you have a bacterial infection, you typically need an antibiotic. Okay, also then we have fungi. Fungi, those are typically what kind of infections? Infections of the skin. Okay, they're larger, some of them can even be multicellular. They're larger plant-like organisms, ranging from yeasts to molds and other infectious agents. Okay. What is the treatment or preventative? First, preventative for fungal infections, definitely cleanliness, but also isolation, so the fungal infection doesn't spread. And then treatment. Treatment is very expensive, antifungal medications, depending on the disease. What else can you get from a fungal infection? Where else is a better way to put that? Where else? Yes. The lungs, from inhalation of the spores, and those are much more serious, and those are the type that you will take an antifungal for. Even an antibiotic. What is an antibiotic? It attacks cells. It disrupts their cell membranes. It targets cells. So it will also help in a fungal infection and, of course, in a bacterial infection. Why doesn't it help in a viral infection? 2 reasons. Viruses are not cells, and viruses often invade host cells, so the immune system will not be able to find it. Then we talked about your protozoal infections, and these, of course, are very serious. Many of them are tropical fevers. All right, and how does a protozoan infection cause problems? Massive immune response, high fever, and these are typically spread by what? Yes? Insect, and it's called a vector. Okay, so make sure you know malaria in particular. It is the #1 death-causing organism when you look at the world, and it's spread by a vector called the Anopheles mosquito. It invades red blood cells. So it causes severe anemia. And with malaria, what you need to know about malaria is it's got that very typical, maybe even classic cycle of reoccurring bouts of fever, chills, and it often becomes, the word is chronic. Okay, it'll show up, it'll reoccur. Years later, reoccur. So pay specific attention to malaria. What is the causative organism by name? It's Plasmodium. You must know that. Then we finished up very quickly with worms and other parasites. Worms, what are worms? They're large, vermiform animals. And typically it's called an infestation instead of an infection. And of course, the route of infection is typically contaminated food, especially undercooked meats. Mode of pathogenicity is it deprives the host of needed nutrients. It also causes cell destruction and, of course, immune response. Preventative, sanitation, thorough cooking of meats. We mentioned a few, tapeworms and roundworm and elephantitis. So each organism, you'll see on the take-home quiz exactly what you need to know. Fill it out. Just the exercise of writing the questions should help you learn the material. Turn it in on Thursday when you come to class. I'll post it on Schoology with instructions. Like I said, open notes, fill it out. I'll grade it so you can use it as a study guide and you'll know if your answers are sufficient. All right, today's lecture is immunity. Immunity. Now we're going to talk about your immune system and how it is designed to handle primarily infectious organisms, but also non-infectious diseases. Immunity I have a definition for you. Immunity is the ability to resist damage. We're not going to be able to stay away from all of these microorganisms. We're not going to even be able to stay away from all harmful substances, but we want to resist damage caused by microorganisms, harmful chemicals, or other pathogens. So immunity is the ability to fight off or resist, in particular, the damage caused by the microorganisms or chemicals or other things that we will be exposed to in the course of our lifetime. Immunity. Another important definition is the word antigen. Antigen. What we've got to talk about with the immune system is we have to talk even on the molecular level, not just the cells that are involved in immunity, but how immunity works is on the molecular level. Cells interact with each other by the molecules that are on their surface. Your immune system does not react to entire organisms. The immune system reacts to parts of the organism on its surface. It's at a molecular level, highly complex interactions. And so the next definition is that word antigen. An antigen is any molecule or particle, usually a protein, that causes an immune response. In particular, an adaptive immune response. And we'll deal with the two branches of our immune system in just a minute. So an antigen is what triggers an immune response. It's any molecule or particle, usually a protein, that elicits an adaptive immune response. So our immune responses are on the molecular level. Our immune system's going to react to individual proteins or particles, part of a pathogen, not usually the entire cell. Examples of things that are antigens that will trigger your adaptive immunity, and that would be the virid capsid. If the virus is free-floating in your bloodstream, your immune system can react, and it's going to react to the protein capsid. This is how vaccinations work, okay, especially viral vaccinations. They will alter the virus in some way, sometimes removing its nucleic acid core so it can't cause any damage, and maybe it'll be a killed virus. But what it'll do is the immune system's going to react to it whether it's alive or not, because it's going to react to and program itself to the particular protein capsid. And this is on the molecular level. And your immune system literally programs itself to recognize that capsid. So the virus capsid, just a part of the virus, is called an antigen because it triggers your immune system. Another thing that can be an antigen is the bacterial cell wall. Parts of the bacterial cell will trigger an immune response, so we call it an antigen. What's the word antigen? Look at it. Anti and gen, G-E-N. G-E-N means same as pathogen, producer or causer. Okay, causer, not a very good word, but it produces an immune response, so it's called antigen. Another example are bacterial toxins. I mentioned botulism is caused by a toxin secreted by a bacterium. So the toxin can be an antigen. Another thing that will cause an immune response is non-self protein markers on cells. Non-self. How many have ever heard of somebody receiving maybe a kidney transplant or some other procedure and their body rejects the transplant? That's because the cell markers on the transplant are not from that person, they're non-self, so sometimes they will get an immune response. And when people receive transplants, they are always given what? Immunosuppressive drugs, because the cell markers on those cells don't quite match because they're not from that person. It's a transplant. Now they're going to match it as close as they can, but it's not going to be an exact match, maybe identical twins, okay? So the surface markers on non-self cells can be antigens. And then any cellular debris that might be left over from an immune response can also cause an additional immune response. So an antigen is any molecule or particle, usually a protein, that triggers the adaptive immune system. The immune system is going to respond on the molecular level. Let me illustrate what I mean by that. How many of you know your blood type? You should know your blood type. Okay. What is blood type? Blood type is caused by protein markers on the surface of your red blood cell. If you have A positive, that means you have the A antigen on the surface of your red blood cells, and you also have the RH antigen. So what they are is they're proteins located on the cell membrane of your red blood cells. And so your cells have all kinds of surface proteins. And that's how the cells interact with each other. That's how the cells recognize self cells from non-self cells, because they don't have the proper cell markers. Probably most of you here are type A, negative or positive, or type O. Type O means you don't have the A antigen. The other type is B. There's A, B, there's A, B, AB, and O, 4 different groups. If you're AB, that means you have both the A antigen protein marker on the surface of your red blood cells and the B. So you're a little more difficult to match, okay? So all of these cellular reactions that we're going to talk about are on the molecular level, where your immune system is going to be looking at the surface of your cells and recognizing it. That cell belongs to me, it's got all the right markers. Or, that cell does not belong to me, markers are different. That's how your white blood cells work. They recognize the cell markers on cells. And that's why, like I said, if you have a transplant and you're given non-self cells, your immune system should probably react to it. All right, so everything takes place on the molecular level. So I'm going to be talking a lot about antigens. Antigen is a particle, usually a protein, many, many times on the surface of a cell that causes an immune response, such as the virus capsid, a bacterial cell wall, bacterial toxins, non-self proteins found on the surface of foreign cells, and even any cellular debris left over from another immune response, or also your body recycles many of your red blood cells. A red blood cell lives about 120 days, so your body's constantly replacing the red blood cells. What happens to the old, worn out ones? The immune system destroys them and recycles them, okay? So let's talk about the immune system structures. Structures of the immune system. I keep saying your immune system, your immune system. What structures in the body play a role in your immunity? There's a lot of them. A lot of structures overlap and have different functions, maybe partly in one system, partly in another. But the system most closely associated with the immune system is your lymphatics. Don't forget that your blood vessels are not the only vessels that circulate fluids. Of course, they circulate your main fluid, which is your blood. But you also have fluids between all of your cells and all of your tissues. They're named differently according to where they're located. But tissue fluid is typically called lymph. L-Y-M-P-H. These are the watery fluids that exist between your cells, between your tissues, and of course these tissue fluids have to be recycled and they all have to circulate. They don't circulate. It's kind of a one-way circulation system, so circulation's not an appropriate word, but what happens is you have lymph vessels associated with your blood vessels that carry and secrete and take up your tissue fluids. You've all heard of lymph nodes. You have lymph nodes located throughout your body. Of course, the ones you notice the most are the ones in your throat or your neck. Those are lymph nodes, but you have lymph nodes in many places in your body, particularly where those vessels are coming together. And the job of the lymph nodes is to filter your lymph vessels. That's why you might hear, I've got swollen glands. Actually, it could be glands. It could be, sometimes you get an infection in your salivary glands. But you probably should say, I have swollen lymph nodes, because a lot of times they will be trapping particles that are infectious agents, and they can become infected themselves. So you have lymph, which is the tissue fluids. You have lymph nodes that filters the lymph. And then you have your lymph vessels that collect your lymph fluid, and actually what it does is it returns it to your bloodstream. Then you have your spleen. Your spleen is an important immune lymph organ. It's also important in your blood supply. Your spleen is a large lymph organ that filters blood, serves as a blood reservoir, and your lymphocytes develop here. Lymphocytes is a population of white blood cells. So you have your lymph, which is the tissue fluid. You have your lymph nodes that filter your lymph. You have your lymph vessels that take up and return excess fluid to the bloodstream. You have your spleen, and then you have your thymus gland. I didn't say thyroid, I said thymus. You do have a thyroid gland located up higher in your neck. Your thymus gland is lower, kind of right on top of your heart. And this is an important gland where some more of your white blood cells will develop. All of these are very active in your immune system. So the structures involved are primarily, of course, the fluid, but then you have your lymph nodes, your spleen, and your thymus, T-H-Y-M-U-S, thymus gland. But probably the most well-known part of your immune system are what I'm calling the agents of the immune system, and these are the white blood cells themselves. White blood cells are called leukocytes. Let's see. Leukocytes. So your leukocytes, common name, white blood cell. See this ending? That means cell, sites, leukocytes. That is the medical name, scientific name for white blood cells. Your leukocytes are the agents of the immune system, and there are several different populations of white blood cells, okay? Probably the most important of those is what's called a monocyte. And then the monocytes develop into what's called a macrophage, because this is a large, very active white blood cell. Very important one for you to learn is the macrophage. The macrophage is the main, let's put it this way, soldier of your immune system. What happens is monocytes are always in your blood, but when they become activated, they migrate wherever they're needed. They can leave the bloodstream and so on, and they become macrophages. And these are 5 to 10 times bigger. They can migrate into the tissues, and these are the most important white blood cells in your immune system. They have 2 very important functions. 2 very important functions. The first one is called phago, with a PH, cytosis. This literally means cell eating. This is the process whereby that red blood cell, kind of picture an amoeboid-like action, will engulf and ingest and then digest whatever it's trying to get rid of. It could be cellular debris, it could be bacterium, many different things. It can even ingest virus particles if it can find them and get a hold of them. So phagocytosis is the process whereby a white cell, in this case the macrophage, engulfs, think amoeba, it engulfs, ingests, and digests cellular debris, foreign cells, or any other antigen. So this is the most important agent of your immune system. This is your most important white blood cell, the macrophage. Its second function is cell communication, cell-to-cell communication. Cell-to-cell communication. And what it does is it's called presentation. It's going to present antigens. Capital A, little g is shorthand for antigen, so I don't have to write it numerous times, but it presents antigens to other immune cells, and it triggers a whole bunch of reactions. So your macrophage can do 2 very important things. It can engulf and ingest foreign debris, antigens, anything like that, and it's going to present that antigen to another white blood cell and trigger a whole nother set of responses. So this is a critical piece in your immune response. The phagocyte, it's your primary phagocyte. The next group of leukocytes are your, which I just mentioned, your lymphocytes. Lymphocytes. There are 2 of these, T cells and B cells. Lymphocytes. Your lymphocytes are a part of what's called the adaptive immune system. Your lymphocytes are going to control and actually be the main immune response. So the T cell, there are several different populations of T cells. That stands for thymus-derived leukocyte, but we won't go into that much detail, okay? T cell and B cell is fine. There are several populations of T cell. The 2, I guess we'll go with the 3 populations I want to talk about, are the T cytotoxic, that's this guy, T sub C. Cytotoxic. What do you think this does? Destroys cells. Here's the guy we're going to come across when we talk about AIDS. This is T helper cell. T helper cell turns on the B cells. It activates other cells. And then T suppressor kind of shuts things down when the immune response is no longer necessary. T cells. The T cells are going to be triggering and causing your immune response to take place. B cells. Their primary role is to produce what we call antibodies. Antibodies are proteins that circulate in your blood that cause immune responses. They're literally in the shape of a Y. The structure of the protein is literally in the shape of a Y. A lot of times when they're being diagrammed, they'll just be written Ys, like a bunch of Ys, and we'll come back to the antibodies later. Very important immune cells as well. The last group of leukocytes assist here. They're called PMNs. That stands for polymorphal nuclear lymphocyte, but we won't go into that much detail either. PMNs are common white blood cells that circulate in the blood. And these have different staining procedures, and many times one of the diagnostics will be, when they're trying to find out what kind of infection do you have, is they'll culture your blood and they'll look to see which type of PMN is the most prevalent in this person's blood that has an infection. Your most numerous are your neutrophils. Of course, these are all stained, and this stains in a neutral stain. And then the next one is eosinophiles and your basophiles. These are all how they stain and what they look like. Your neutrophils, your eosinophiles, and your basophiles. Hold on, let me drop the E there and add the O. That's just the type of stain that picks them up. Let me get rid of that O, it's in the wrong spot. There it goes. If you have, the O goes over here, let's fix that. If you have a parasite infection, these are going to be very high. And what these do, these are your first responders. These are for parasites. These produce histamine. How many have ever taken an antihistamine? Okay, that's because you're having an immune response and you're getting too much histamine. Okay, so those are your leukocytes, your so-called white blood cells. And these are the agents of your immune system. I want you to pay attention to the macrophage and its two functions. It's probably the most important one. But also then your T and B cells we're going to be discussing later. Your T cells kind of control a lot of the immune response. Your B cells put the antibodies into your blood. And they also are going to provide immunity for the next time you come in contact with that same pathogen that has the same antigens. All right, so that is the immune system as far as structures and cells. Now I want to talk about two divisions. You actually have two immune systems. Now these two immune systems use both of these, but they have different roles and different responses. So there's two branches, maybe we could call it. The first branch is called the innate immunity, and the second branch is called the adaptive immunity. So let's put that up for you. Their overall purpose is the same, but they act at different times and they do slightly different things. Your innate immunity and your adaptive. So I want you to be able to see the difference between the two. Innate, adaptive. Pretty crooked. Let's try that again. All right, the innate immunity versus the adaptive immunity. Why is it called innate? Why is it called adaptive? What do those adjectives mean? If something is innate, that means it's already present and it's a natural part. So your innate immunity is already present. It's just a natural part. It's functions that your body is born with. Just present normally. It's always there. It's the innate immunity. Adaptive. What do you think that means? It's part of your immune system that adapts to specific pathogens. But of course, the problem with that is you have to have experience with those pathogens, don't you? That's why we have vaccinations. Vaccinations expose you to a pathogen so that you can have an adaptive immune response to it. So then when you come across it, let's say in real life, your body will already be ready for it and you probably won't display any symptoms. So innate versus adaptive. Those two branches are just what they're called. So your innate immunity, also sometimes called non-specific response. This responds to every problem. So it responds to any tissue damage. That includes injury. That includes spraining your ankle. When you sprain your ankle, do you get an immune response? Yes, you do. What happens? What happens when you sprain your ankle? It swells up. That's an innate immune response. It also can get red and very heated. The swelling and the heating, that's an immune response, but it's innate. It happens because you've damaged tissue in your ankle, probably pulled some ligaments or something. So that responds to any tissue damage. This is very highly specific. I'm using the word highly in the sense that it always responds to a particular, there's that abbreviation again, it always responds to a particular antigen. It's extremely specific. All right, so here, this is non-specific. This, we could call this the trigger. Any tissue damage will trigger an innate immune response. But the trigger here has to be a particular antigen from a very specific source. Okay? So this is going to click on every time. This will click on when you are exposed to the antigen. And of course, this is the whole goal of vaccinations. Trigger this so that the next time you will not display symptoms. So we have the innate immunity versus the adaptive. Non-specific, highly specific. Trigger here, tissue damage, any type. It doesn't have to involve an infection. Okay? And this does involve an infection, though it doesn't have to be a microorganism. There could be some non-infectious involved there. So then, this we can say is our general defense mechanism. These are all our general defense mechanisms. Lots of them. And this is what we typically think of when we think of our immunity. We mostly think of our adaptive immunity. If we've been vaccinated or we've already had the disease, we will say, I'm immune to that. And what we're talking about is this one. So this is what we typically think of when we think of being immune to a certain disease or pathogen. So when I'm going to talk about your innate immunity, your innate immunity first. So you see the difference. This innate immunity is your natural defenses. Who can give me your first and best defense that would fit in this category? Yes? The skin, exactly. It's a general defense mechanism. What's another one? Yes? The mucosa. Coughing and sneezing, trapping of pathogens in your respiratory tract, the hydrochloric acid in your stomach. All of these are general defense mechanisms, and they go over in this classification. They're part of your innate immunity. Okay? You already have your skin, right? You already have. Oh, we even talked about lysozyme. Lysozyme is found in sweat. Lysozyme is found in tears. So these are all general defense mechanisms. These are specifically triggered mechanisms. They have to be triggered first. So these kind of don't work too well on the first response. How many have ever, maybe you had chicken pox or you had something especially viral, and it takes, you've heard it say, well, once a child has the chicken pox, it's already too late. Why? They've already had it for 7 to 10 days before they're even displaying symptoms. That's partly because this is being stimulated, okay? So this has to be triggered. This always responds. General defense, specifically triggered defense, okay? So that's the difference between the two. Now let's talk about our general defense mechanisms. I've divided them into 3 categories that I'm going to call prongs. The 3 prongs, think of a pitchfork, the 3 prongs of the innate immunity. So we're talking about our innate immunity. We have a mechanical, a chemical, and a cellular. These are all general responses that always occur anytime there's a problem. So the mechanical prong, the chemical prong, and the cellular prong. This is innate immunity, non-specific general body defenses triggered anytime there's a problem, any tissue damage. So that's the first thing I want to talk about with the innate immunity. Innate immunity, review the definition. These are your non-specific defenses that respond to any tissue damage. Okay? Then we said that it is triggered by any tissue damage. What triggers it? Anytime there's damage, you have cells being destroyed and cells being ruptured. And so they're going to secrete chemicals when they're ruptured that will trigger the immune response. It can be a pathogen or it can be trauma. Remember, spraining an ankle has nothing to do with an infectious agent, does it? But it'll still elicit an immune response. Which one? Innate. So the 3 prongs. First, the mechanical prong are physical means. The mechanical prong uses physical means to block entry or contain and limit damage. It's either going to block entry into the body or it's going to contain and limit damage. So it's physical means. It's going to bar entry, block entry, or it's going to contain the damage to a smaller area. The first is the skin. The skin and mucosa both are physical barriers. They are the first line of defense. Because remember, before a microorganism can cause infection, it has to be present and it has to proliferate, right? So our first part of a mechanical prong is prevent entry, barrier. So we're going to form a barrier. We already talked about this. Both the skin and the mucosa can act in different ways to keep the pathogen out. The second part of the mechanical prong is inflammation. This is a mechanical means to what? Contain the infection to a smaller area. It's also called the inflammatory response. Inflammation has two purposes: containment and recruitment. What do I mean, recruitment? We want to recruit those white blood cells to the area so they can do their jobs. So inflammation has two purposes: containment and recruitment. It's going to contain the damage to a smaller area, okay, and it's going to recruit white blood cells. The problem is, sometimes swelling causes additional problems, doesn't it? Especially if it's in an area such as the brain where there's no room for swelling. So there are downsides, and there's also overreaction by the immune system. Inflammation includes redness, pain, heat, and swelling. What's going to happen is we're going to be having tissue fluids accumulate that causes the swelling. It becomes inflamed. It's red and warm because we've got increased blood circulation. And again, the purposes are confinement and recruitment. A third means is fever. And of course, fever can cause other problems, and it has its downsides as well. Fever, purpose of, you know what a fever is, obviously it's your elevated body temperature. And the purpose of fever is to increase cellular metabolism. It's going to kind of ramp up your body's metabolism. And then an additional means of the mechanical prong is removal. Coughing, sneezing, and so forth. This, of course, is a big part of the mucosa's job. The mucosa lines all of your body tracts and openings. So it makes sense that we'd have mechanisms to expel or remove pathogens, particularly the mucosa. You have your coughing and sneezing reflexes. You have the ciliated cells to sweep things up to where they can be coughed out, and so forth. So that's the mechanical prong. Physical means to block entry and confine damage. Then the chemical prong. The chemical prong literally includes particular compounds that have immune properties. Compounds. There's a couple things involved in the chemical prong. The first we're going to call chemical warfare. This is where compounds directly attack and destroy pathogens. We have compounds that directly attack and destroy pathogens. There are two that I'm going to mention. Capital C with a little apostrophe behind it is shorthand for complement. Do you remember when we talked about irreducible complexity last semester that I gave complement? It's called the complement cascade as an illustration of an irreducibly complex system. This is a series of 9 proteins that will assemble in your blood and destroy bacteria. Okay, so complement is a series of 9 proteins circulate in your blood all the time, but when there's bacteria in your blood, it will assemble into a big complex and destroy the cell membranes of bacteria. Okay, keep in mind you don't want immune responses going on all the time. So one way that your bloodstream is designed so it doesn't clot when it's not supposed to, or it doesn't attack things it's not supposed to, these proteins will be free in the blood, but then when there's a problem, they will assemble themselves and then do their job. Otherwise, they'd just be floating around and possibly causing problems that you don't want. You don't want your complement cascade attacking your own cells. Another one is called interferon. This is an antiviral, naturally occurring antiviral. As a matter of fact, some of our antiviral medications, we've copied this, okay, and made it artificially so we can give it to people with severe viral infections. So the chemical prong involves chemical warfare, direct attack on the pathogen. Then we have stimulation of others. So we're going to have warfare, and we're going to have stimulation of other branches. So we have compounds in our blood that will directly attack pathogens, and we have compounds in our blood that will stimulate other responses. Our immune system is very redundant. There's all kinds of different mechanisms to fight off infection, to cut back damage to the body, and so forth. These include histamine. Histamine. All right, you're used to taking antihistamines, but histamine is an important, it's called the vasoconstrictor. It will constrict vessels. All of this is to confine and battle infection. And then we have what are called pyrogens. So we've got histamine. What do you think a pyrogen does? Pyrogen. That means fire producer. What do you think pyrogens do? Immune system. Pyrogens are going to stimulate what?
Your body's not enjoying
fever, fever, fever. This stimulates fever. Fever's not going to happen unless something triggers it. And these are the compounds in the blood that do so. Pyrogens. That's the chemical prong. Then the cellular prong. What do you think the cellular prong involves? Cells. What kind of cells? White blood cells. Cellular prong is the white blood cells. They're not just in the adaptive immunity. They're also in the innate immunity. Your white blood cells will do two things. Well, your macrophage, I said, was your most important white blood cell. What does the macrophage do? What two things? Here they are again. Phagocytosis and recruitment. Okay, so your cellular prong involves your white blood cells, two main ones, the macrophage and your neutrophil. The macrophage and the neutrophil. The neutrophil is your first responder. At the initial part of your infection, you're going to have all kinds of neutrophils on site doing phagocytosis. Then the macrophage, maybe we could say the big guns, show up, and they are your main phagocytic cell. And of course, these are the cells involved, the macrophage and the neutrophil. So we're going to start phagocytosis and recruitment. The macrophage, of course, does your main recruiting. It's going to secrete many of the compounds in your chemical prong. So your macrophage and your neutrophil. The macrophage, the main one, the neutrophil gets there first. They're kind of expendable. Your immune system will just send those neutrophils and they're going to get massacred until the macrophage gets there. Literally warfare. Okay, so that is the innate immune system. So your white blood cells work in both. The macrophage is a part of both the innate and the adaptive immune system. Last is the adaptive immune system. This is a highly complex interaction of cells. But it produces what we typically think of as our immunity. The innate, those are just general defenses, mechanical, chemical, and cellular. But now our adaptive immune system. Our adaptive immune system is our main immunity. It's a highly complex interaction between numerous cells in the body to destroy particular pathogens. So your adaptive immunity is a highly complex interaction between cells and antigens to produce a very specific response. It is the adaptive immunity that we want active and fully functioning in our body. And what happens when we're talking about HIV, the AIDS virus, is it destroys the adaptive immunity, leaving the person only with the very general immunity. So adaptive immunity, three characteristics of your adaptive immune response or your adaptive immunity. Highly complex. I'm going to brush the surface for you of how it works. Then you'll understand why the AIDS virus is so dangerous, and you'll also understand how vaccinations work and why vaccinations are typically a good idea. All right, so three characteristics that you must know. The first is specificity. Remember, this is not triggered unless we have a specific antigen. So specificity. So your adaptive immunity must be pre-programmed, and it only responds to one particular antigen at a time. But that's okay, because your body produces what are called B memory cells. And so you'll have many different cells that each have their own trigger. So then your body can quickly respond. So specificity must be pre-programmed to a particular antigen. So that means two things. It must experience the antigen sometime in the past, and it only responds to that antigen, which is why you have to have numerous B cells in your system. A third thing is this is how vaccinations work. By triggering and actually programming your body to specific antigens. That's why you can get a vaccination to measles, for example, because the vaccination will trigger your adaptive immune system. That's why sometimes the next day or two you'll have fever and achiness. Your immune system's being triggered. And then the next time you come in contact with the measles virus, your body's going to destroy it before you even notice it. Okay, so specificity. It must experience the antigen in the past, and then it only responds to that particular antigen, and this is the basis of vaccinations. Second characteristic, memory. So specificity, number two, memory. After experiencing the antigen, the body will retain a B cell that is programmed for the next encounter with the antigen. Okay, so after we've had exposure to an antigen, the body will retain a specific B cell that is pre-programmed to that antigen. And of course, those B cells then, when that antigen shows up again, that B cell is going to divide, and it's going to it'll transform into what's called a plasma cell, and it'll start loading your bloodstream with antibodies to that pathogen. And so that pathogen's not going to be able to be present or proliferate, is it? Memory. And then the third is immediate and heightened response on the second encounter. Not the first. It's going to take it 7 to 10 days. But immediate and heightened response to the second encounter of a programmed pathogen, of a programmed antigen. Specificity, memory, heightened and immediate response. This is what I meant when I said this is the purpose of a vaccination. is to program your immune system to that specific pathogen, something on that pathogen, and then it has no chance to proliferate in the body. So specificity, memory, and then immediate and heightened response on the second encounter. Just like we had 3 prongs now, we have 2 arms. There are 2 arms of the adaptive immune response. Two things. We're going to have what's called the cellular arm and then the humoral arm. I didn't want to use prongs again. Okay, so the first one is the cellular arm. Immunologists would refer to this as cell-mediated. And we would refer to the humoral arm as antibody-mediated. So we have 2 arms, cellular, humoral, cell-mediated, and antibody-mediated. Okay, in the cellular arm, of course, this is done by white blood cells. There's basically some steps involved. This is complex cell-to-cell interactions, and this is the heart of your immune system and how your body destroys things, particularly in your bloodstream, also in your tissue fluids, and even in some of your organs. Your liver, for example, when I say liver, you think about how the liver detoxifies things. You think of how the liver has to, in an alcoholic, detoxify a lot of alcohol and eventually becomes destroyed, right? When I say liver, do you think about that as far as your immunity goes? Well, your liver also is full of macrophages. So it's able to do a lot of immune function as well. So first thing that happens is the antigen has to be presented. This is done by the macrophage. So the macrophage has a major role in innate immunity and another major role in adaptive immunity. So the antigen has to be presented. What's going to happen is the macrophage has to engulf the antigen, and then it'll actually put the surface marker on its own surface. That's called antigen presentation. Highly complex. Oh, I wonder how many millions of years it took to evolve. Very complex cell-to-cell interaction. And this is just your immune system. Okay, so it's going to present the macrophage to little th. Who's th? T helper. Guess which, remember we said that viruses are subcellular particles or subcellular parasites that attack a specific target cell? Guess which cell in your entire body is the target of HIV? This guy. And so what happens is T helper will then turn everything on. Turns the adaptive immunity on. What happens after maybe even years of being HIV positive is a person that is HIV positive no longer has a T helper cell population, and so they progress to what's called full-blown AIDS, and they can't fight off anything. And they're going to die of AIDS-related dementia, they're going to die of certain types of cancer, they're going to maybe even just die of extreme weight loss and so forth because they have no adaptive immunity. So your antigen is presented by the macrophage to the T helper. The T helper recognizes it, and the T helper turns on the immune response. It's going to activate other T cells, your cytotoxic T, and then your B cells. It's going to activate either your T helper cells, or your T cytotoxic T, or your B cells. That is the adaptive immune response. And so then we get the humoral response, and that, of course, is the antibodies. And we will have to finish the humoral arm on Thursday.